So we're going to just give people a few minutes to jump on. And I notice we've got several people jumping on now. And so, hello, I'm Karen, the Director of Education at Millicent Rogers Museum. Welcome to those of you who are jumping on, and feel free to use the chat, and we will include some of your comments and questions in the conversation as it progresses. And we'll just give people a few more minutes here, or one more minute. Okay. We don't generally use, with these kind of conversations, the features of raising your hand. We just try to keep it grassroots and say, interrupt each other as we feel, just like a regular conversation would happen. So I'm going to start by offering a land acknowledgement here at the Millicent Rogers Museum. We are located on the ancestral lands of Tiwa-speaking peoples, known today as the Red Willow people of Taos Pueblo. We strive to deepen our relationship with the Red Willow people through collaboration, while acknowledging and honoring the complex history of the Red Willow people, past, present, and those in the future. We express gratitude to this land and to the Taos Pueblo elders and ancestors who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. So welcome to this conversation about arts and cultures and the economic and social impact of the arts and cultures in our community. Just briefly, the Millicent Rogers Museum was a partnering organization with Americans for the Arts. And thank you, Jenna, for being here representing that at the national level. And in conducting surveys that generated quite an extensive report and a lot of really great information. So we have Jenna from Jenna Stiles-Lias from the national level, Americans for the Arts. And she is the director of the AEP 6 Community Engagement and Equity. We have Carol White, who is an MRM board member, very involved in supporting arts and culture at administrative level, and was super involved, really the go-to person for getting these surveys and community partnerships going. And then also Michelle Laflamme Childs, Executive Director for New Mexico Arts. So we have community level, state level, and national level joining in on this conversation. So welcome, ladies. And Sarah, do you want to kind of get us rolling?
Thank you. I do. I want to send a special welcome to our audience, because I have it on good authority that a number of you are intimately involved in the arts and your communities. And so we thank you very much for your participation right off. And please ask questions and send your comments. So to get started, we all think of the social part of arts. We who are involved, we say art saves lives. Obviously, it does. But there is so much more. It is pride in the neighborhood, pride in your country, pride in the quality of life, the livability that arts bring to the community. And then it goes into the jobs. It goes into the business boost that arts brings. And we can go further: historic, cultural, documentary, legacy of everything. And so, Jenna, I want you to just jump right in and tell us about Americans for the Arts, and of course, where you are in the country.
Sure. Hi, y'all. My name is Dr. Jenna Stiles-Lias, and I go by she, her pronouns. I am joining you from the Elk Ridge area of Maryland, which is smack dab in between Baltimore and DC. And we are opening the space up and bringing some connection, hopefully. We are coming from the unceded lands of the Piscataway and Susquehanna people. So I want to make sure that they are lifted up in this space as well. My visual description, just for the folks who are hearing this on the recording: I'm a Black woman, old millennial, I'll say. I have a darker red lipstick on and dark hair with a black shirt and hoop earrings. And I am so excited to be a part of this conversation. I'm actually honored to be in the room with some people who did hard work to get this study across the finish line. And obviously, based on the data that I've looked at, have a deep, deep love, commitment, and support of arts and culture in your region. So like, kudos to you. I'm like chills right now. And a couple of things about me that aren't on the bio, just as a quick, I'm a mom, I'm a pregnant person in the world right now. And I love data. I love Beyonce. I love dance, acting, singing. I love all things art. So that's just a little bit about me and a little bit about where I come from. But the question was about Americans for the Arts. We are a national organization that's been around since the 60s, I believe, probably longer than that. And we champion advocacy, arts advocacy, research and convenings. That's what we love to kind of focus on. And AEP6 is our sort of signature research project that comes from our organization. AEP6 has been around since the 90s. It started with 33 communities, and now we're at 373 communities across all 50 states, including Puerto Rico. So that's a little bit about Americans for the Arts and a little bit about AEP6, but I don't want to take up too much airspace, so I'm going to pass it back to Sarah.
Thank you. It must be made clear to our audience that your surveys, this diligence to you talk to arts organizations, is just that. And so just in advance, I want to say that the extraordinary figures you're going to tell us about are not the tip of the iceberg. There's more, because they're all the individual artists that are not part of the survey. How could they be? And so your figures are conservative, and that's just wonderful, because that means there's so much more grassroots we don't know about, and particularly in New Mexico. And Carol, won't you talk about the extraordinary amount of work it was to get people in the Millicent Rogers and the Taos region to be participating and give their figures?
Sure. And I want to say a big thank you to the 63 arts and culture nonprofits in Taos County that help collect data, help collect surveys from audience members, and also provided a great deal of information about their own economic operations. So with Americans for the Arts, we had to come up with 800 audience member surveys and get 800 people to answer questions about how much they spent when they came to a play or a dance event or a concert. And what did they buy dinner? Did they come from somewhere else? Did they spend the night at a hotel? Did they buy clothes to wear to it? Did they buy souvenirs? Let's put a number on that and see what that looks like. And with the help of the arts and culture organizations. And can you imagine in a county the size of Taos, 30,000 population, that there were about 80 arts and culture nonprofits that we identified as eligible to participate, and 63 did. And boy, that is pretty impressive and amazing and wonderful that people were willing to do it. So it was
high participation. That speaks to the community specifically in your neighborhood, of how involved everyone is. Recently, one of our panelists on a previous event, Wayne Bayal, a Native American painter, spoke to how he was employed always as a carpenter, a fine woodworker. And yet, as he said, his Native American community was there was something in their blood that had arts, and they all were able to fall back on arts. And so it's an augmentation of their profession or whatever job that they were doing. So that's another entire aspect to what you're saying. And again, it speaks to the community involvement that is so special in your area. And I think, Michelle, you need to take up that thread and talk about this participation, which it's past most other states, it seems to me.
Michelle, unmute.
Yep.
You're
Sorry.
muted.
I was
There you
working
are.
on it. Just had to reach over to that
Okay.
mouse. Yeah, so we participated at the state level. So there were three local communities in New Mexico who participated at the local level: Taos County through Millicent Rogers, the city of Santa Fe, and the city of Albuquerque. And then the state jumped in to try to fill in the gaps, basically. And our focus was, as much as possible, rural communities in the state. So we and to make sure that we reached the BIPOC and Alana numbers, to make sure that we were targeting. We have state institutions. We have the largest Department of Cultural Affairs in the United States. You may not know that. The largest state-run museum system in the United States. And two of those museums are specifically targeted to honor the histories and cultures and traditions of people of color, whether it's the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture or the National Hispanic Cultural Center. So we were able to make sure we ran surveys through those organizations, which happened to be in cities that were participating in the program as well. But the department managed those to make sure we got events from those. And then we reached out to our grantees, primarily the folks that we fund through our grants program, outside of the I-25 corridor. So not Santa Fe, not Albuquerque. And we did not target anyone in Taos. We let you all handle that. Las Cruces is in I-25 and we counted them. But we tried to make sure we were reaching those rural communities. And the state did, considering the challenge. I mean, it was interesting when I started working a little bit with the city of Santa Fe, since I live here, that I realized they could sort of rally up some volunteers and go to an event as long as they had the permission of the person running the event and collect surveys. I didn't have that option. I had to beg the nonprofit to do that themselves. So it was very challenging to try to get small nonprofits across the state to take that load on themselves, because I didn't have an army of people I could send 4 hours away to go run a set of surveys. So it was a really interesting challenge. I had never been through it before, but I am certainly extremely glad that we participated at the state level and were able to help New Mexico have statistics statewide beyond just the rich communities that were represented individually, that we were able to bring in some of the other parts of the state to make sure they were also being represented, and to demonstrate that it's not just Santa Fe, Taos, and Albuquerque that benefit from the arts, that it is all the communities across the state.
Well, it seems like there are a
want-
bunch of haystacks that you all have worked on, and you've had to go finding the needles. Now, Karen has up the list of all these wonderful organizations in Taos, but you have a comment. Make that, because then I have a question for Jenna.
Yes, I mean, I knew this was going to be a lively conversation, so I do want to make sure to, I'm supporting in what Carol had originally said, all of our partners that helped, gather these surveys. And then to Michelle's point, it was super challenging. So it took all of us, and it's a tremendous effort. And I know that Jenna has some statistics for us as far as a region and a state, that it's really kind of amazing. So I want to kind of give a shout out to some of our viewers who are, interested in this information and also played a part in supporting. And so Juniper from the Harwood, we really appreciate that. The Harwood got surveys at their events. And then Jessica, of course, worked so hard to get together surveys and venues where we could gather surveys. But I don't want to spend all the time talking about statistics. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows this was not an MRM effort. This was a whole community effort. And so Jenna, do you want to talk about that state level a little bit, or the national level? I'm sorry.
Sure. Yeah, I was just gonna break down because I don't know who's in the room, but I want to make sure that we zoom out to make sure that we know what is it. The Arts and Economic Prosperity Study Survey is a
Right.
study of arts and culture audiences and their organizations. And so when we start talking about all of this hard work and all, we have to understand that, like, what does that mean? That means that people were we gave folks, we as an Americans for the Arts gave each of our participating communities goals to reach when it comes to how many audience intercept surveys. So we said, all right, for most folks, like it was about, now some folks were a little bit more, some folks were a little bit less, but most folks were like, we have to get 800 surveys in the matter of a year from audience members. And that may sound really easy, but post-COVID, man, that was a challenge. People were like, no. Folks were like, I've been surveyed out. I'm not interested. There weren't a lot of people. People were slow to come back. So, you know, you got to get 800, but you can't get 800 from one event. You got to make it diverse. So we got to make sure that we get to to Michelle's point, the BIPOC, Alana folks, you got to, and organizations, I'm sorry, you got to make sure you get to the ballets, you got to make sure you get to the theater. So it was really, really hard. And then that was our one part of the survey. Nationally, we're as an industry, the nonprofit arts and culture industry is a $151 billion industry. So just that number alone. So that was what we reported from the audience intercepts, but also what we have created or what we've understood from the organizational surveys. And that's the other part of this process. So we asked organizations, again, people who have been surveyed out, their capacity is low, they don't have the volunteers. Michelle talked about that a little bit, but we've asked them to dig in and answer these questions so that we can have the advocacy on the other side. So I just wanted to give a little bit of perspective as to, like, what is this AEP stuff? Why does it feel like it's so hard work? And why do we keep thanking people? Because it was hard and we need to give thanks where it's deserved. So first, I want to just name that. When it comes to the numbers and the data, man, Taos, so on average nationally, the audience spending was about $38, between $36 and $38. Taos spending was $96. Like, that's absolutely crazy compared to the rest of the country. $96.60. That is mind-blowing compared to the rest of the country. I don't really get into like versus spaces because from a national level, it could get me in trouble in saying it in a public space. But Taos is holding up from a national perspective to the local Taos. That is incredible numbers that you all are delivering. And that's not to like throw a stone at the statewide numbers, because the statewide numbers are way over the national numbers as well at $57.73. So these numbers are, that's why I was like, when I came in the room, I said, we are in a room with people in a state that love the arts. So I just wanted to name those as that's just tip of the iceberg when it comes to spending and some of the data and how it kind of relates to the national study, because I did see that in the questions. But I'll let Michelle talk about the next part.
Well, if I may quickly jump in there, in comparison to my state, Colorado, the spending by organizations is not quite twice what the spending is of the audience. Interestingly enough, I mean, there's more employment, more other things that make that happen. But what you're saying is that the Taos, it's literally 3 times what the audience brings in, which is magnificent. So,
and that is leverage. That's what is leverage. For every $1 that is invested in local arts and culture nonprofits, in Taos, we get a $3.44 return. And that is a beautiful thing. We knew that our numbers were high. We just didn't know how high. We didn't know what it actually was. And we needed this information to be able to make our case with policymakers and funders. You know, we were very excited to see that Taos County, compared to our peer study partners across the country, communities across the country with population of less than 50,000. Taos certainly has less than 50,000. That our economic impact is 15 times higher than the national median. It's really big. And what would happen? What would happen if we were able to invest systematically in the nonprofit arts and culture organizations here?
Well, you do have a leg up, because I think that many people think of New Mexico in general, but northern New Mexico perhaps in particular, that tourism and arts are synonymous. And this doesn't happen elsewhere in that way. And I think probably, Michelle, you've seen that in your long time participation in government and in talking to all these different groups. Would that not be so?
That's absolutely true. And speaking for the state numbers, and because those are the ones I know well off the top of my head, at least some of them, when you look at the spending per audience member for those who said they traveled to attend the event across the state, so the statewide average was $127 a person, which is insane. I mean, that's a huge number, and that's the statewide average. I mean, that's including rural communities across the state. Anyone who traveled from far away to get to far outside of the county, I think they describe it, to attend the event. So that just demonstrates right there from a numbers standpoint that that's the case. But there was also data recorded in this, collected during this survey process, that was about the value of the arts. And there were, I have so many papers in front of me right now, trying to pull up all of my little pieces of information. So 18.3% of New Mexico's arts attendees traveled from outside the state. That was the 121.74, but I think it's actually county. When asked non-local attendees, why are you here? 26.2 said, this arts event is the primary reason I am here. Mm-hmm. And then when pressed a little further, what would you have done if the event was not taking place? They would have gone to a different location to attend an event similar to the one they had gone to and taken the survey. I mean, so yeah, they are arts and tourism. Here in New Mexico, it's very unique and very special. I agree.
I want to jump in with a couple of things, Sarah. Just kind of a little bit of housekeeping. So people are chatting in and wanting to engage with the conversation, which is awesome. And so I'm going to interrupt and kind of watch that so that we get the questions in with the flow, and that the recorded audience, the future audience, will hear the questions. Also, there are a couple of questions in Q&A. So I want to just let people know that we will leave some time at the end to specifically respond to the Q&A feature questions. So that being said, the executive directors in the audience would like Michelle to talk about next steps for the state. And then also Jessica wanted to take note that the audience spending numbers are above the cost of admissions, which brings me to point out, I really would love to hear some discussion about these ideas of direct costs and indirect costs, and sort of the ripple effect of respending a dollar within the scope of your community. Go.
Well, the next steps for the state are simple. As you all have experienced, this is a lot of data. I mean, the report is very thick. And when you just look at that report in the way that it is presented, it's a series of numbers that don't relate to each other necessarily or to anywhere else. So to be able to make the comparison, for example, that statewide it was $57 a person and nationwide it was $38 a person, you have to have two separate reports you have to compare two totally different reports to get that information. It's not presented that way. So what we are doing now is analyzing that data so that we can come up with statistics that will be valuable to use in trying to secure public funding for the arts. Because one of the things that was mentioned, I think, but not emphasized, is that this is exclusively nonprofits. organizations. So no Netflixes, none of the for-profit entities in the state participated. And it was also mentioned earlier, I don't remember who said it, but that this is only the numbers of people who responded. This is not extrapolated information. This is actually only the data of those who responded. So we have to take that into consideration as well. So trying to sort of figure out how we put together information for legislators so that they understand how valuable the nonprofit, in particular, arts sector is. It's easy to talk about how important the arts are, but when you start to get into nonprofit, people get a little weird and think of it as charity work. They don't understand sometimes the huge business and financial impact the nonprofit art sector has in community, as you were just mentioning a second ago, right? That respent dollar, the fact that somebody comes to that event and they had to hire a babysitter for their kiddo, maybe a pet sitter for their pet. Someone told a story, I think, in one of our presentations about they had to pay someone to milk their cow while they went to an event. They might go out to dinner. They might get ice cream. They might go for cocktails. They might have taken an Uber. They parked their car in someone's yard who rented it out while the event was going on. There's so many ways people spend money besides just the cost of the event. This is the survey that captures that data, and that's the data that's compelling, and it shows that investing in nonprofits benefits the state and the communities economically. It's not just intrinsically, which we all know is the most important thing, but economics are really important too.
Mhm.
We do. I think what you just said, Michelle, was so important because to some legislators, we may be asking for justification for the existence of these organizations, whereas in actual fact, what you all do is affirmation, and they just need the accurate or as accurate as possible information set in front of them, because they're balancing information from dozens and dozens of different sources, and if we don't speak up, we don't get. And Michelle, thank you for that. And I want to move, Jenna, you were talking about in the American for the Arts number 6, specifically that you had post COVID some very different criteria. Can we go into that? Because that may be of interest, I think, to our audience.
For sure. There's so much about my position in general. There's so much about AAP6 that is different, and just a scratch of the surface of the work that we plan on doing going forward. But like I said, AAP6 has been around since the 90s, and we had originally gone through asking folks to gather the same hard work, gather, a number of surveys. This time we had a digital option because, it's 2022 or 2024 now, but when we were doing this, it's 2022, we should have a QR code. So they were like, that was a new and different thing. But when it came to the brass tacks of the survey process, we thought about the arts and culture story broadly. My colleague, a national treasure, Randy Cohen, my boss, actually has this. Economic impact is one quiver in your case of arrow making or arrows for advocacy, right? So economic impact, we drove that home. There was an economic impacts survey before AAP6, and now it's an economic and social impact survey process. And we're going to get more into that space as well. We had quantitative, which means those numbers, the data, but we also had some qualitative aspects to the study this go round that were really, like Michelle said, affirming, and Sarah, affirming to what we all know. Karen said it too. Carol knows about it. It was really affirming to what we had originally thought. And it sort of started to help us break the ground in understanding how to get more qualitative data. So spoiler alert, you asked about what's happening next in the state, but nationally, we're trying to figure out how to get more of that qualitative data, how to go into communities and who don't think the economic impact is anything. They don't believe in that. But can we still talk about impact, and how do we talk about that, and how do we gather data? So that's different. And we also focused on BIPOC and a lot of Black, Indigenous, people of color. Alana sometimes is used, it's African, Latin, Asian, Arab, and Native American. We stepped into spaces that were serving those communities, right? So not necessarily every survey came from a BIPOC and Alana person. We didn't do it that way. We were looking at those organizations serving, those organizations who want to support those communities. And we were able to gather data for the first time ever with some of those organizations in order to better advocate. Now, did we do a fantastic job on a national level? We did not. We did a good job. I think we had a very gallant first effort. And I'm not afraid to say it. We're transparent here, right? And we have room to grow. We have room to do more. And I wanted to, again, like always, just lift up both the state and and House for doing such a fantastic job of getting into those communities and jumping right in, knowing that jumping right in effort and having to be able to have some data that will support those communities is incredible. And lastly, for AEP6 this go round, we really tried to champion, build, support connections between community, right? And so we have this big arts and culture ecology, right? It used to be just arts. We were like, just find the arts organization. But now that it's arts and culture, we wanted to drive that cohesion between different arts organizations and between different community spaces, because sometimes the art doesn't always happen in the no offense, the museums, right? We know in the museum, no offense. I know, I love y'all, MR. I know, and it happens on the streets. It sometimes happens in faith-based basements and social service organizations. It happens outside of those spaces that we have built up to be arts and culture, right? So we tried to break down some of those walls and barriers and create connections so that A, connection's always good, and B, so that we can advocate together, because there's so much power in the numbers of building community across different arts and culture organizations. So that was a huge win. And I've heard many stories across the nation that was like, oh, we've partnered with the NAACP for the first time, one of their organizations. And man, they have such a big audience that has these kinds of people that will be able to really help us get to so it's been a really good journey to kind of understand, yes, all arts and culture is not a monolith. We are not all the same. We got different kinds of things that we do. However, but if we have a same cohesive advocacy message, that is powerful. So that was the first time that we've done something like that for AEP6. And those were some of the new advances for this particular project.
I think Jenna is majorly lacking in enthusiasm. and Carol, I wanted to ask you specifically, based on what she just said, one of these things about spending of the participants, you being involved for many years with the museum, there's such a thing as inspiration of the visitor. And so the visitor doesn't just come to the Millicent Rogers. All of a sudden, you want to go and have a very nice dinner and discuss what has been seen. You want to say, oh, well, gosh, shouldn't we go to the rodeo? Or how about let's come back in June or July and go to the Taos Pueblo powwow. And there is that inspirational thing, but it's not just one and done.
That's right. And I think arts organizations are continue to become more aware of that and figure out how to leverage that, how to push, how to get that going in the community, which is a beautiful thing. I just wanted to say one thing, which is I appreciate Juniper's saying that this is the first time that Taos has participated in this study of arts and culture economic impact. And that's exciting because it gets done every 5 years or so. COVID delayed it a little bit. But what this means is now Taos County has a baseline, and New Mexico kind of already had a baseline, except then there was COVID. But now we have, in Taos County, we have a baseline. And so 5 years from now, we can see what happened. And if there are additional investments in arts and culture, we'll be able to see the impact of that. And that's pretty exciting too, I think. And we really appreciate Americans for the Arts and the state, goodness, encouraging all the arts and culture organizations to participate. And then Americans for the Arts, Americans for the Arts made this kind of study affordable. If Taos County had tried to come up with the money for this, we just couldn't have. It would have been too expensive. But with Americans for the Arts, we were able to do it. And
I wonder if you can talk about any one of you who would like to address this. So Alice is engaging in the chat regarding the politics involved in financial support of the arts, and maybe for our viewing audiences for the future recording, talking about how the support is impacted and what constituents can do to influence political officials who will not advocate for funding the arts.
Well, New Mexico has a blossoming statewide arts advocacy organization, Creative New Mexico. They're sort of reestablishing themselves, using that nonprofit status to engage more as statewide advocates for the arts on the whole. And I should clarify, as a state employee, I cannot advocate directly for funding for the arts. I'm an executive appointee and it's not appropriate. So I'm not a good person to ask how one should do that, since I'm not allowed to do that. But Creative New Mexico is, and they have this information. It's been shared with them. And they are also kind of waiting on the state and local communities to come up with the facts and figures from the data that would help drive that advocacy effort. So there's that piece of it. Also, public funding for the arts comes primarily to New Mexico through the state arts agency, which is what we are. Every state has a state arts agency. They were all created after the National Endowment for the Arts was created in 1965. Most state arts agencies were established immediately on the heels of that, including us. We'll be celebrating our 60th anniversary next year. And those organizations, these state arts agencies, there are 56 of me across the country in 50 states and 6 jurisdictions. And our job is to, as agencies, channel that federal National Endowment for the Arts money to the states. And then the National Endowment for the Arts, you may or may not know, requires a 100% match by the state to their funding. So not only does that mean that the state is forced to contribute a minimum of whatever the NEA grant is to the state, it also means it's unlikely that the state will ever not fund the arts. I mean, it's happened a couple of times over the years, not in New Mexico. In Alaska, it happened, and then in one other state. But they're likely not to cut it because they don't want to lose that federal money coming into the state. So the NEA was really smart in the way they did that. So there are 2 organizations that in our area that would be worth looking into about ways to advocate, including Americans for the Arts nationally. But Western States Arts Federation, they do a lot of advocacy for the arts, and the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, who has very compelling information about public funding for the arts specifically. And then, of course, Americans for the Arts, who has an advocacy arm of the work that they do as well. So I know that that doesn't help you in that it's not giving you, here's exactly what you say to Senator XYZ, and you know Senator XYZ or Representative XYZ better than other people might if they're your person. And if you have a sense they're not supportive of the arts, then the hope is that we will be able to provide you data that would help you make the case for that person, whatever their roadblock is, to maybe help them through it. And then potentially working with someone like Creative New Mexico or WestAF to find resources that might be helpful in that advocacy effort.
Yeah, I was gonna, Michelle, you know, she's good at her job, y'all. Let me just tell you that much. I don't don't need to tell her that, but Mara, that was a really good answer. I'm just gonna add to what I've learned is that from a national perspective, it's the jobs and government revenue and dollars that get you in the door. Folks, we've talked about now this intrinsic value that we understand, but like literally, we don't talk about arts as politic. It's not a politic issue. It's a policy issue. We talk about it as a policy issue. It's bipartisan. We should be talking about it in that way. Lean away from that politics side of it. Bring up the jobs. Bring up the government revenue that is small investment, big return. And then once you get in the door, you can talk about some of those social impact experiences. We can talk about social cohesion and civic well-being. Those politicians love to hear that kind of stuff. And then I love that Jess wrote in the chat, try to find within your communities, your arts and culture communities, people who are interested in being on somebody's commission or board that is not arts and culture, but that's a government entity, because that's where you get to like get in rooms and spaces to make those kinds of asks that, me, actor on the street, doesn't usually get into those spaces, right? Or at least I can speak for the community in that way. And then again, what Michelle said was the Arts Action Fund. They have like actual templates of like, here's what you can say, and here's 10 reasons to support the arts in Taos, New Mexico, for example. Here's 10 reasons. So here's 10 things that you can say to get yourself in the door to advocate for arts and culture. So those are some of the things, and I can probably drop in some resources in the chat if I have the time to grab it off the internet.
Oh, that's a good idea. I'll do that too. Thank you, Jenna.
So I would like to just circle around that a little bit and go to the grassroots community level and kind of touch on something that Jenna mentioned earlier, that the places where these conversations aren't necessarily happening are museums. So I would like to sort of agree on that and talk about the Taos County report, because we talked about the state report, and thanks, Michelle, for putting that link in there. But the Taos County report is really fascinating and is just filled with such a great amount of information. And so what I'm kind of playing around with is, how do we get those grassroots conversations happening so that people in our communities are talking about these issues and aspects of life in the grocery lines and at the pharmacy, because I think that that's what we need to do, is just heighten awareness in general around the impact. So for example, in that Taos County report, you get real close and personal with Taos County by telling people 958 jobs in this county are arts and cultural jobs. And then a secondary impact of that is another 358 jobs are impacted by the fact that these arts and culture organizations, purchase supplies from other businesses and hardware and whatnot. So I would just like to advocate for that, getting the grassroots conversations going, because that will sort of trickle up, perhaps.
That's an important thing of the trickling up. And in what Carol was saying about how this was the first time you really had in Taos County a baseline. In my interval residency since the late 50s in this area in general, we saw how, for whatever reason, the influence of Taos had kind of trickled down a bit. And the Santa Fe groups, the Albuquerque groups, the other things had more gotten important in the visitor's mind somehow. And now here's the place where Taos is beginning to shine again in this, and this report is the affirmation thereof. I mean, how wonderful is this?
Well, we're pretty excited, but I'm also excited about this, and I'm a believer in this economic impact study from my past life. Everybody's got a past life, I guess. But to Michelle's point, that I worked, you can tell from my accent probably, I worked for the Tennessee Arts Commission, the State Arts Commission in Tennessee, and we did the yeah, go State Arts Commissions for sure. And we did the study statewide in Tennessee 5 years ago, and were able to use that data, and you take the opportunities as you come to them, as they come to you, and the opportunities for every state and every community are different. But with COVID, there was an opportunity with federal, state, and local recovery funds, and in part because of good politics, but in part because we had the data, this data from Americans for the Arts, that study. Tennessee was able to get a part of that money, $80 million statewide, which was the average, the budget for the whole state up until that time had been $10 million. And here we got 80. And so I'm totally a believer in this. And you just have to use it to take the opportunities that come to you and make some too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it shows how this is a national initiative overall. And I think reaffirming, we have Jenna from the national level, Michelle, and then down to our very small, wonderful Taos community with Carol. And it's at every possible level. And so, Karen, we're getting closer to the ending of our program. Are there questions that we need to lay on?
There are a couple, but I want to ask first, because what I also was leading into is, and Carol, you can probably answer this. So how do we, so the partnering organizations got the Taos report. Michelle put the link up there for the state report. How are we getting out the Taos report?
Karen, wait, I think I'll double check it, but I think that what the link that I put up for New Mexico Culture, I sent along the Taos, the Santa Fe, and the Albuquerque reports so that they would
Okay.
all be there for people.
Okay, perfect.
So they're not the customized ones because I got them off the, so at some point I'd like to replace those, but the data is there. It's the local reports. It's just not the one where you type in like your.
That's the one I love. It's 60 pages long, right, Carol? It's got tons of information.
And so at least that high level data is there for the state and the local communities, at least for now. So that
Okay.
people have a central place to go and be able to get that information.
Okay, perfect. And then let me see. So did we address, I think you spoke about, Michelle, what the next steps are for the state.
Yeah, just for us next, it's just to do the work on the analysis of that data so that we have some compelling information. You may know we did a study back in 2014, the Bieber study, the UNM Bureau of Business and Economic Research study, which gave really wonderful, great numbers, but that's now a decade old. One of the things that we're going to struggle with is those numbers they look much bigger. So, because it was a broader study focused exclusively in New Mexico by an organization who that's what they do. So now we're trying to compare numbers from a nonprofit, a subset of nonprofits only in the state. And it's how do we then come up with data to share that's compelling and doesn't look weak in comparison to what people have been seeing for the last 10 years. So that's the first step. The goal is that we will have all that done by May, and we are going to have a big kickoff, some kind of celebration here in New Mexico. I believe Randy will be coming out here, and we'll do some kind of, rather than sort of the initial, which was just like, here's the raw data. We'll be able to say, here's what the data says, here's maybe what we can do with that. And so that's going to take time, but that's the next step for the state.
Okay, great, thanks. And I think we touched on how Taos, this was also in the Q&A, county ranked with other counties. We touched on those numbers, did we not? Jenna?
Yeah, I was able to do a quick national versus, and then Carol did a more drilled in how they compare to counties with like population. So we did touch on that very briefly.
Okay, and I also just want to verbalize one of Jonna Lynn's comments. Jonna Lynn is our new board president at the MRM, but she brings up a really good point that from the long-term sustainability standpoint, it's critical to share this information. So, which to me that translates to the smaller, honed-in reports of the various counties that participated, because the boards themselves don't often understand fully their impact on the communities. And then I would like to add myself, if anybody wants to speak to this, a question about, so when I was looking at this whole report, I was also thinking about recent conversations that are happening actually worldwide, but including Taos, about sustainable tourism and how this kind of report can inform those conversations when we look at sustaining arts-based community and dealing with the tourism and the impacts of tourism in a sustainable way that meets the needs of the economy, the tourists, and the people.
I love that point to bring up. And nationally, we were at 70% local, 30% non-local. And like a bunch of everybody said, is like basically the arts and culture, it's proven in the numbers that the arts and culture keeps our neighborhood folks happy in the neighborhood, stay here to do art or to take in art, but it also brings in people. And from a national perspective, if you add that hotel, and again, we are very conservative at Americans for the Arts when it comes to the methodology and how we do it. That's what keeps us a reliable resource. We only factored in one night, but that one night made $38 or 40, I'm sorry, for the national one, it was $40, about $40 for non-locals, for folks who were coming into the county, city, state, wherever. It made it $200, right? Because that hotel rate triples the rate at times. So it's a very, very good conversation to have, and especially around the BIPOC and Alana work that we're doing, because we don't want it to be like a token kind of tourist like checkbox kind of thing where it's extractive, but we want them to be authentic experiences that bring people in and bring people back over time and bring investment, purchasing, buying, continuing to support and amplify all of the organizations that they come to. So I definitely am applauding all of the tourism work that you all are doing, creating the sustainable tourism that's equitable and good. And I think the data does support the need for that and the hunger for that in the country. And I think that it's only growing. I mean, this is, post-COVID, folks were still kind of nervous, I think, in 2022 when this was happening. And I think it's just going to continue to bloom and grow when it comes to that data point, when it comes to the local, non-local, and that tourism perspective.
Thank you, Jenna. I have one more question that popped up in the Q&A real quick for Carol. If you want to talk about the next steps for Taos and perhaps how these 63 partnering organizations might continue these conversations and this work together.
Yes, one of the things that we've been talking about is the possibility of a workshop to bring together the local arts and culture nonprofits to talk about how we might work together to use this data for shared and collaborative advocacy. And so I would say to any listeners, stay tuned. We'll be back for that. We're also very excited about the statewide activities that are going on, the analysis that is happening, and the work that's going to be done with Randy Cohen from Americans for the Arts to come in. I think that was in May. Is that right? Michelle?
Yeah, we don't have a firm date, but I think he said the second week of May, maybe. I have to go back and look. Once we have a real date, I'll make sure the whole world knows about it.
Well, we're excited about it. So thank you for leading on that, and thank you for all that you have done to help spread the word about what this means.
Well, thank you all. And I know we're right at 7, but I wanted to add one thing to the tourism conversation about what could potentially be the extractive nature of tourism and being careful about all that. When we talk about the statewide numbers, again, because those are the ones that I am mostly involved with, and I was talking about the great dollar amounts that the out of non-local, which it's described as non-local, so that can mean a lot of different things, but the non-local people spend, that's a really wonderful number to use. It's definitely shows that tourism and the arts are related. But I think what's really important is to note the flip side of that, and that is that across the state, approximately 82% of arts attendees were local. So it's more than just that tourism piece, right? It's also that when we build things like an opera or a community theater, it's not only, and maybe the intention of that was to bring people to the community, but as long as it is done well and not there aren't barriers to entry that prohibit local people from participating, local people can benefit from those too. So they do go hand in hand, I think, if it's done right. And I agree that that's a thing to be careful about, is how one grows that aspect of a community without raising barriers to accessibility, to participation in the kinds of things that might be designed to bring the outside people in.
Thank you, Michelle. I want to go ahead and read Jessica's comment in the chat so that we capture it in the recording, because it's a great comment. And Jessica, thank you so much because for clarifying the word responsible tourism rather than sustainable tourism. I appreciate that. So in our report, Jessica says, in our report, it shows that non-local spending is 323% higher than local spending. I think the opportunity that we have as a community is that working to ensure responsible tourism is to find ways that 323% can be distributed equitably, and that it makes it to creatives, artists, makers, and organizations that might not currently be feeling the economic benefits of that cultural tourism. So thank you, Jessica, for contributing that. And I will ask for any final comments before I make some, one new message. I just want to make sure. Thanks from Taos. Thanks for coming, Sonia. Thanks from Taos Arts Council. All of our guests, thank you for coming. I'm going to offer this time up for a minute for our panelists. If there's any final comments you'd like to make, and then I will kind of close it out.
I just want to thank Taos County and City of Albuquerque and City of Santa Fe. But Taos County, because you're here right now, because there's no way the state lift, having never been through it before, at least on my part, would have been possible without the local communities bringing what they did to the table to really flesh this data out. So I wanted to thank everybody here and anybody who had anything to do with this survey effort, because speaking from experience, it's quite the lift. So thank you. Your participation was critical to it being the broad, wonderful set of data that it is. Thank you. And to Jenna.
Yeah.
You right back. I thank you right back. I thank you to all the folks at MRM. A special shout out to Jessica from Taos County. And Michelle, there's so many people to thank, and all of the 63 organizations. We could have the credits, the Oscar music to come off just with my thank yous. So I just wanted to say that. And when it comes to the advocacy effort, it doesn't stop. This data has about a 5-year shelf life. So if you feel like you're behind, if you feel like you're just catching up, if you feel like you're like, this is making my head spin, you have time, and it will still be a strong advocacy tool in 5 years. And if you're like, oh, I missed the boat, don't worry, we're going to do it again. AAP7, we're already thinking about how to work that out. So keep your ear to the ground and your hearts and minds and advocacy arrows moving forward.
And just one last thing for the recording audience, and for anybody who doesn't know who this Jessica person is.
Oh,
It's Jessica Stern, and she is the
Oh.
Director for Economic Development in Taos County, and has a background in the arts and understands how to do economic development and the role and the importance of the arts and culture sector. And so we are so thrilled to have Jessica with us in Taos, and look forward to working with her and with all our nonprofit partners to really use this data to leverage additional support for the arts and culture sector.
Go, Jessica!
Yay, Jessica.
Could I make the
Sure.
last comment, please? And I'd like to make a personal comment. My family was drawn to New Mexico because of the opera, along with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so that's where our relationship started. My family were musicians and played in the orchestras, etc. And so that's from the 50s. And there is a uniqueness of all these artists and arts organization, but somehow New Mexico seems to have uniquer, if we can
Uniquer.
make
Good,
a term.
Sarah.
And we are so thrilled, even though we're neighbors, you're only a couple hours away, and any excuse to come and visit and partake in all of these things and add our funds to that as well. And then all the profit organizations and all the individual artists who spend money for their clay, for their pots, their oil paints, whatever it is. And those people are even up above all of this that we're talking about. So thank you.
Thank
And
you,
Miss
Sarah.
Karen,
Okay, so wrapping it
close
up, I do want to thank my friend Sarah Francis. Always great to have you helping the museum in this capacity. Makes the programs fun, and you are such a great conversationalist. So that being said, I do need to bring it back home to the MRM and let everybody know that we are observing winter hours. We are open 10 to 5. Thursday through Tuesday, closed on Wednesday. However, Dawn, our store manager, wants people to know also that the store can be accessed on Wednesdays, even though the galleries are closed. So you just have to ring the doorbell over here. Minis is in process. So our annual mini show and sale, which engages Taos County artists from the very experienced to the novice. Just had our first intakes today, had a great turnout, and people are welcome to turn in artworks almost clear up until the opening. So just contact us if you have something to turn in and you did not get a chance. Also, tomorrow is another intake day. And I think that's all we have for tonight, ladies. Good job. Thank you so much for being here. We
come
appreciate
back again.
and
We
It
want all
feels
of you.
like we could easily fill another hour without
could.
even
We could
Well,
just
why
twice
not?
about it, you know?
There's so
So
much more
good.
to be said.
There
I would
is.
love to have individuals
Yeah.
or even more of the organizations to have spokespeople just to say, what has been your grassroots experience? Not just the figures, but say, how has this worked for you?
Well, maybe
So-
we'll have a grassroots panel. A
I
grassroots.
think so. Carol, you can help with that by suggesting.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Bye. Hasta.